Castlevania is dead. Konami didn't bury the name under Pachinko Machines and Lords of Shadow 2. The official stake to the heart came during the company's controversial departure from the game industry during 2015. Of course, Igarashi's putting out the not-so-subtle, blood-stained Ritual of the Night, but Castlevania as a series is unfortunately long gone. However, that will never diminish the quality titles that the series has outputted in the past. Rondo of Blood is a fan favorite amongst many of the other franchise giants, and while it's not perfect, it still proves itself to be another great adrenaline-filled adventure against the forces of Dracula. Beginning in 1986, the Castlevania name was immediately impactful and successful. Combining elements of Japanese aesthetic with classic horror motifs, the franchise had set itself up from its initial production run to be a market hit. The first 3 titles released for the NES were financial proof of this, providing Konami with what would easily become one of their biggest intellectual properties. Following this success, Konami would extend its reach across every platform, developing for not only the SNES, but the Genesis and the TurboGrafx-16 as well. However, while the SNES game, Super Castlevania 4, and the Genesis game, Castlevania Bloodlines, would reach North American audiences, the TurboGrafx-16 game wouldn't be released here at all. This was mostly due to the fact that Rondo of Blood was developed solely for a revision of the TurboGrafx-16, named the PC engine, which was released exclusively in Japan. Think of something akin to the Sega CD, only it was unavailable in American territories. An American edition would see the light of day in Castlevania Dracula X for the SNES, but it's only a loose interpretation, and is ultimately a much different game as a whole. It retained the same plot and characters, but the level design and gameplay options are very different. Rondo of Blood wouldn't actually see an English version until the strange PSP port within Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles, which arrived sometime in 2008. Most people would finally get to play the long-awaited action game in 2010 though, through its re-release on the Wii's Virtual Console. Meet Simon Belmont's descendant, Richter Belmont, otherwise known as that guy you play as during the opening of Symphony of the Night. The year is 1792, and Richter is now out to save his lover from the clutches of Dracula and his various henchmen. And, well, that's about it. Castlevania as a series is admittedly never something you want to play for the story, but it should be noted that Rondo of Blood goes out of its way with these anime cutscenes. The cinematics are perhaps their way of demonstrating the power of the CD technology that they now have. But it seems like they put a lot of work into presenting a near non-existent story. That's not to say I didn't enjoy these aspects, but the plot is hardly ever stressed in this series, so it just comes off as odd to me that they would dedicate significant resources to this. Castlevania usually takes the form of 3 different styles: linear 2D action games, Metroidvanias, and 3D hack-and-slash games. Rondo of Blood is notable because it's probably the last linear game in the series to make its way stateside, and what a conclusion it is. More than any other before it, Rondo of Blood instantly proposes awesome set pieces and memorable environmental design. Similar to Super Castlevania 4, no 2 levels look alike at all, leaving each to be as intriguing as the last. To me, the core quality of a Castlevania lies within its level design, and Rondo of Blood exemplifies this aspect, because the raw gameplay here is as solid as ever within the walls of the castle. Add that with some of the series' most engaging and challenging, yet still fair, boss fights to date, and you've immediately got the composition of another great Castlevania title. The mechanics of Rondo of Blood may be its biggest drawback to some, as it does initially come off as somewhat of a step back from what Super Castlevania 4 had. You can't move the whip in all the directions that you could before, and you're back to a more one-dimensional utilization from the NES titles. However, this is a simple cost from the overall improved mobility and item usage that Rondo of Blood justifies itself with. Yes, Richter can do backflips, but the real highlight here is honestly just moving regularly. There's something less sluggish about the process here than there has been in the past, even in 4, and traversing through the tribulations that Dracula has never been more intuitive. In addition to that, items now have more significance than they had beforehand, particularly evident with the new given feature of Item Crash, an ability that allows for some sort of super attack to be used with a sub-weapon. Despite all that, the end-all best feature of Rondo of Blood is something that places it apart from its predecessors in the best way possible. There's no pointless timer. While I understand that it was a normality from the era, something that naturally latched onto games after the arcade boom, it goes without saying that it's the last thing you want to worry about when playing something like this. Why it took this long to deviate away from that tradition will remain a mystery to me. In light of this new design decision comes a slight twist to the format of the levels themselves. Very similar to Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, there are alternate paths and characters to experience. Each given level has a direct beginning, but the actual conclusion can vary based on how you play. While the alternate paths do lead to completely different level and boss encounters, it never leads to the unlocking of a multitude of characters like Dracula's Curse did. In fact, Rondo of Blood only has one other playable character in Maria, who ultimately breaks the entire progression. And it's to the point where it's honestly just not as fun anymore. I mean, the real game lies with playing Richter, so just stick with him. Now, my biggest complaint with Rondo of Blood is that it's rather short. While the actual level count is probably around the length of the first game, the levels themselves never seem to last as long as they have in the past. At least in the first and fourth game, there's something grand about the level progression that's a bit lacking in Rondo of Blood, even though there's still solid selections. Another aspect that should be noted is that the game is noticeably easier than past entries. There are some undoubtedly challenging parts to this game, but let's just say it never quite reaches the difficulty heights that the Medusa head room from the original game had. It's still hard, but closer to Super Castlevania 4 in that regard. Turns out the 16-bit era still genuinely looks good. While the game's sprites aren't quite as detailed as what's prevalent in future titles, such as Symphony of the Night, the terrain and creature design is noticeably more intricate than anything in the series that came before this. On top of that, it goes without saying the music is nothing short of incredible. The Castlevania series has always had my personal favorite original soundtracks, and Rondo of Blood may just top that list with its own take on symphonic and progressive metal, even though the synth is noticeably more pervasive. Perhaps the only downfall in the audio department is the fact that it's on a CD. While this allows it to obtain a better overall sound quality than past titles, it succumbs to obvious loops, something of a normality for PlayStation and Saturn games as well. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I understand it was a limitation of technology. But it does immediately take you out of the moment briefly when it does happen. If you're looking for a classic Castlevania to ease yourself into the series, look no further than Rondo of Blood. It carries over the classic strategic elements while also retaining the pulse-pounding feel that made the ones before it so good in the first place. While I admittedly have a few minor nitpicks with the design choices over some of the other games, the game as a whole is still nothing short of excellent. In a world where Konami probably will never put out another game in this franchise, and Igarashi's future endeavors will probably only consist of Metroidvanias, hey, which is still not a bad thing, Rondo of Blood stands out as one of the final goodbyes for this classic style and gameplay. To be honest, Rondo of Blood isn't even my favorite in the series, but its quality should not be understated.